Betrayal doesn't always start with lies. Sometimes, it starts with distance. The way someone pulls away without realizing it, the way their laughter becomes softer, the way they start looking at their phone like it's the only thing that makes them feel alive. That's how it started with Sophia. She was careful at first, subtle, testing the waters, leaving small cracks in our marriage that she thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. I noticed everything. I saw the way she hesitated before kissing me goodnight. I saw the way she smiled at texts she never let me see. I saw the way she started going to bed later, staying up with her laptop, lost in conversations she thought I didn't know about. She was pulling away, and she didn't even realize I was pulling her in. I didn't react the way most men would. I didn't get angry, didn't accuse her, didn't demand answers. That would have given her an easy way out, an excuse to lie, to manipulate, to cry and say I was just being paranoid. No, I did something much worse. I became the man she was looking for. It started with a simple message. Nothing dramatic. Nothing suspicious. Just a casual, well-timed comment on a private forum I knew she visited. A place where women talked about their relationships, about their fantasies, about the things they were too afraid to admit to the men in their real lives. A joke, a tease, a moment that felt like an accident but wasn't. And just like that, she took the bait. She responded playfully at first, not realizing who she was really talking to, just enjoying the attention, the thrill of something new. She told herself it was innocent. That's how it always starts. I let her make the first real move. I let her be the one to initiate private messages, to ask questions, to open the door for me. And when she did, I walked through it effortlessly. I crafted the perfect man. Someone just mysterious enough to intrigue her, just charming enough to make her laugh, just emotionally available enough to make her feel understood. I gave her everything she wanted from me but never asked for. And it worked. She started staying up later. She started checking her phone constantly, waiting for my messages, getting frustrated when I took too long to respond. She thought she was in control, thought she was being clever, thought I had no idea she was falling for someone new. But every message she sent, every confession she made, every little detail about her wants and desires, she was giving me the tools to destroy her. I studied her, learned her insecurities, her fantasies, the things she didn't even realize she was desperate for. I became her perfect addiction, and she didn't see the danger in it. She thought she was sneaking around, outsmarting me, getting away with something. She didn't realize she was walking into the most elaborate trap she would never escape from. She was about to fall in love. Hard. Completely. And when I took it all away, she wouldn't recover. Sophia thought she was being careful, thought she was keeping her little secret tucked away in the corners of her life where I would never find it. But she had no idea that I was watching her fall, guiding every step, creating a perfect storm design just for her. She checked her phone constantly now, smiling at messages she shouldn't be smiling at, biting her lip as she typed, lost in some fantasy she believed was real. She thought she was getting away with something, but she didn't realize I was the one making her feel that way. She thought she had found a man who understood her in ways I never had. But the truth was, I had been feeding her exactly what she wanted to hear. I had been studying her. Every message, every late-night thought she spilled out like a guilty pleasure, every little detail she thought was private. I used it all against her. I played the game perfectly, never rushing, never pushing, letting her take the lead, letting her believe that she was in control. She wanted excitement. I gave her just enough danger to make her heart race. She wanted romance. I wrote words so carefully crafted that she felt them in her bones. She wanted someone who saw her, truly saw her. I became the only person she felt she could be her real self around. She had no idea that I was already 5 steps ahead, that every confession she made only tightened the noose around her own neck. She started staying up later, making excuses to be alone, claiming she was exhausted when in reality, she had spent half the night waiting for messages, obsessing over a man who didn't exist. And the best part? She didn't even feel guilty. She told herself it wasn't real, that it was harmless, that she wasn't doing anything wrong because she hadn't met him, hadn't touched him, hadn't crossed the line. But she had. She just didn't see it yet. She was already betraying me in the worst way possible, not with her body, but with her heart. And I made sure she fell even harder. I gave her space to want me more. I took longer to respond, let her feel the ache of waiting, let her crave me in ways she never craved her own husband. I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew that when I finally gave her what she wanted, when I made her feel needed, she would drown in it. She started sneaking off more, making calls she thought were private, whispering words I had designed for her to say. She started lying without hesitation. And every time she did, she stepped further into my trap. She had no idea I was watching her from across the room, catching glimpses of her reflection in the dark screen of her laptop, the way her lips parted when she read my messages, the way her body shifted like she was imagining something she wasn't supposed to be imagining. She had no idea that I knew every secret she was keeping, every thrill she was chasing. She had no idea how far I was going to take this. She thought she was in control. She thought she had power. But the truth was, I had already taken everything from her. She just didn't know it yet. Soon, she would. Sophia was slipping further, losing herself in something she thought was real, something she thought she had chosen. But she hadn't chosen anything. I had. I had created the very thing she was falling for, shaped it perfectly to fit into the cracks of her desires, fed it to her piece by piece until she craved it more than anything else. She thought she was in control, but she wasn't. She was already mine. She just didn't know it yet. She was distracted now, always lost in thought, always holding her phone a little too tight, checking it every few minutes, waiting for responses that I made sure to delay just enough to make her restless. She was used to attention, used to men chasing her, but not this. This was different. This was me controlling the chase, making her feel the weight of waiting, making her wonder if she was the one falling harder. And she was. I could see it in the way she smiled at her phone, the way she bit her lip when she thought no one was watching, the way she would turn over in bed, thinking I was asleep, just to check her messages one more time. She needed this. Needed him. I started pulling away just enough to make her desperate. I made the conversations shorter, the compliments rarer, the availability scarce. And it worked. She started sending more messages, longer ones filled with things she had never told me, things she was too afraid to admit to anyone else. She told him, me, her secrets, her fears, her regrets, things she wished she had done differently, things she wished she had with me but never did. She confessed how unhappy she was, how trapped she felt, how much she wished for something more, something real. She called him her escape. And that's when I knew I had her. Completely. She started making excuses to be alone, started canceling plans, started prioritizing a fantasy over her real life. She became reckless, leaving her phone unlocked, forgetting to hide notifications, letting her obsession bleed into reality. And the best part? She wasn't even aware of how obvious she was becoming. She was too far gone. I caught her once, standing in the kitchen, staring at her phone with her fingers hovering over the keyboard, unsure of what to say. I leaned against the counter, watching her, waiting. Finally, she sighed, biting her lip, whispering the words she thought only he would ever hear. I wish we could be together. I almost laughed. She had no idea how much I had already taken from her, how much deeper she was about to fall, how much she had already destroyed her own life without me even needing to lift a finger. She had no idea that there was no man. There never was. Just me, her husband, the one she thought she was outsmarting. She had no idea that she wasn't the one pulling the strings. I was. And soon, I was going to cut them. Sophia had lost control. I could see it in the way she moved, the way she checked her phone like it held her entire world, the way she hesitated when she spoke to me, like she was afraid she might slip up and reveal something she wasn't supposed to. She thought she was being careful, that she was still in charge, that she was playing the game without getting caught. But she wasn't playing the game. She was the game. And I was about to end it. She had no idea I was watching her closer than ever, listening to her whispers, reading every message, studying every little reaction she had. She thought she was falling in love. She had no idea she was falling into a trap. I made sure to make her feel it more, the ache, the longing, the need for something she thought was real. I took longer to respond, kept my messages short, distant, careful. I let her stew in her own desperation, in the idea that maybe she was losing him, that maybe she wasn't enough. She started overcompensating, sending longer messages, typing and deleting and retyping, second-guessing herself in ways she never had before. She was spiraling, caught between the life she had and the life she thought she could have, trapped between a husband she was drifting from and a fantasy she was completely addicted to. Then I gave her a taste of fear. One night, I didn't message her back at all. No good night, no reassurance, no answer to her desperate, "Are you still there?" She stayed up late, tossing in bed, checking her phone, waiting for something that wouldn't come. I turned away, pretending to sleep, listening to her restless sighs, the quiet frustration, the growing panic. By morning, she was on edge, distracted, snapping at me over nothing, unable to focus on anything but the silence I had given her. She needed him, and now she was afraid of losing him. That's when she made the decision. She wanted to meet. She didn't say it right away, didn't make it obvious, but I knew. I saw it in her messages, the way she hinted at it, the way she tested the waters, waiting for him to be the one to suggest it. And I let her wait. I made her beg without realizing she was begging. And when I finally gave her the answer she wanted, when I finally said the words, "Maybe we should," she broke. That night, she could barely look at me. She was restless, fidgeting, chewing her lip, checking her phone, planning in her head how she was going to do this, how she was going to betray me completely. And I let her. I didn't say a word. I just watched. Then, I took it all away. The next morning, before she even had the chance to text him, I deleted everything. The messages, the account, the emails. The man she loved, the one she was willing to throw her entire life away for, was suddenly gone. No explanation. No goodbye. No trace of him ever existing. She panicked. I watched from across the room as she checked her phone over and over again, refreshing the app, logging out, logging back in, switching between messages, searching for something, anything that could explain what had just happened. She whispered his name under her breath, staring at the blank screen, blinking like she was trying to wake up from a nightmare. But there was no waking up. This was real, and she broke. She locked herself in the bathroom for nearly an hour, and when she finally came out, her eyes were red, her hands were shaking, and she looked like she had lost something she would never recover from. I pretended not to notice. I didn't ask what was wrong. I didn't acknowledge the devastation on her face. I just kissed her on the forehead and told her I loved her, and she flinched. She was crumbling, falling apart in ways she couldn't even explain. Because how do you grieve something that was never real? How do you cry over a man who never existed? How do you explain a heartbreak you can't even tell anyone about? She couldn't. And that's why it was perfect. That night, she barely spoke. She barely ate. She went to bed early but didn't sleep. I could feel the weight of her regret, the way it crushed her, the way she was replaying every moment, every word, trying to understand how she had lost something that had felt so real. But it wasn't real. It never was. And now, she was alone in the destruction she had created. The best part? I wasn't even done yet. Sophia was losing herself. Every time I looked at her, she was somewhere else, lost in thought, staring at her phone like she could will him back into existence. Like if she just refreshed one more time, he would return, and everything would go back to the way it was. But there was nothing. Only silence. She barely spoke to me, barely looked at me, moving through the house like a ghost of the woman she used to be, and I let her, watching, waiting, knowing that she was breaking under the weight of something she didn't even know how to grieve. She was mourning a man who had never existed, a love that was never real, and the worst part, the part that ate her alive, was that she had no one to blame but herself. She had given her heart to a stranger, risked everything for someone who was nothing more than words on a screen, and now, she was drowning in the emptiness of it. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. I needed her to fall further. I needed her to hit rock bottom. I needed her to understand the full weight of what she had done. So I pushed her. I started being the perfect husband. Sweet, attentive, thoughtful in all the ways she wished I had been before. I made her coffee in the mornings, sent her random texts throughout the day, told her how beautiful she looked even when she barely met my eyes. And I watched as it destroyed her. She didn't deserve kindness. She knew that. She knew she had betrayed me, had been planning to leave me for another man, and yet, here I was, treating her better than I ever had before. Like I was completely oblivious, like I still adored her, like I was the one who didn't see what was happening. And she hated it. She hated herself. Every compliment I gave, every gentle touch, every small act of love made her flinch, made her eyes shine with something that almost looked like tears, made her grip her phone tighter before realizing there was no one left to message. One night, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in her hands, staring at it like it had betrayed her. She hadn't noticed me yet, hadn't realized I was watching. She exhaled sharply, then typed something, hesitated, deleted it, typed again. I waited. When she finally pressed send, she held her breath, her body stiff with anticipation, waiting, hoping. But I already knew. There would be no response. I had already erased him from her life. I walked toward her slowly, keeping my voice soft. Everything okay? She jolted, turning her phone over instantly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Yeah, just tired. You sure? I pressed, tilting my head. You seem a little off. She swallowed hard, her fingers curling into the blanket, gripping it like an anchor. I'm fine. I sat beside her, brushing my fingers through her hair gently, watching as she tensed under my touch. You know you can talk to me, right? She nodded, but I saw the way her throat worked, the way her jaw tightened, the way she was suffocating in her own guilt. And that's when I delivered the final blow. I've been thinking, I murmured, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. We should go away for a weekend, just the two of us. No phones, no distractions, just us. She froze, completely. Her body stiffened, her breath caught, and for a second, I thought she might actually cry, because she knew what that meant. No phones, no internet, no way to check, no way to wait for him. I could almost hear the war in her head, the panic clawing at her, the desperation to find some excuse, some way to stall, to buy more time for something that was never coming back. But she had nothing. No reason to say no. No excuse that wouldn't sound suspicious. So she swallowed the lump in her throat, forced another fragile smile, and whispered, "That sounds nice." And just like that, she was completely mine again. But she would never be the same. Sophia was unraveling, piece by piece, and she didn't even realize I was the one pulling the strings. She tried to hide it, tried to act normal, but the cracks were everywhere now. The way she hesitated before answering simple questions, the way her phone stayed in her hand even though there were no new messages, the way she forced herself to smile at me when I touched her, when I kissed her, when I told her I loved her. She was haunted by a ghost that had never been real, mourning a love that had never existed, and the worst part? She had no one to blame but herself. I watched her crumble with quiet satisfaction, knowing she was trapped in a cycle of guilt and grief, knowing she was reliving every message, every lie, every stolen moment she thought she had gotten away with. She couldn't move on, because there was nothing to move on from. No closure, no explanation, just silence, just regret. She thought the worst was over. She thought she had lost everything already. She was wrong. That weekend, I packed the bags for our trip, planned everything perfectly. A cabin, far enough from the city that she couldn't check her phone. No signal, no Wi-Fi, no way to escape. Just us. I could see it in her eyes when we got there, the way she forced a smile as I led her inside. The way she clutched her phone even though she knew it was useless out here. She was struggling, but she couldn't say why. She couldn't explain the weight pressing down on her, the suffocating feeling that had nothing to do with the air in the mountains. That night, I cooked for us. I poured the wine. I set the mood, watching as she sipped nervously, as she avoided eye contact, as she played with the edge of her sleeve like she wanted to disappear. And then, finally, I decided it was time. You seem different lately, I said, setting my glass down, my voice light, careful, but deliberate. Is everything okay? She flinched, but covered it quickly, shaking her head, forcing a smile. Of course, just tired. I leaned forward slightly, resting my arms on the table, studying her like I was trying to see inside of her. Are you sure? She nodded too quickly, too eagerly. Yeah, everything's fine. I exhaled slowly, letting the silence stretch, letting her feel the weight of the moment before I spoke again, before I changed everything. I know, Sophia. She blinked. Know what? I tilted my head slightly, my expression unreadable. I know about him. Her breath hitched. Her entire body froze. For a second, I thought she might actually stop breathing. Her hands curled into fists, her lips parted, her face drained of all color. I don't. Don't lie to me, I said, my voice calm, steady, absolute. I know everything. She stared at me, her eyes wide, her pulse visible in the hollow of her throat. Michael, I leaned back, crossing my arms, watching as her entire world collapsed. It's funny, I murmured. You were so careful, so sneaky. You thought you were in control, but you weren't. You never were. Her lips trembled. I don't know what you're talking about. I laughed softly, shaking my head. That's cute. You think you can still lie to me. I let the words settle, let the fear sink into her bones. Tell me something, Sophia. What was it about him that made you fall so hard? Was it the mystery? The chase? Or was it the way he knew exactly what you needed to hear? She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly, her entire body shaking now. Michael, please. I leaned in, voice dropping lower, sharper. He never existed. Her breath caught. A choked sound escaped her lips. What? I smirked, letting the truth devour her. He wasn't real. There was no man. There was only me. Her face twisted in confusion, in horror, in pure devastation. No, she whispered, shaking her head. That's not. You think you were the one in control? I scoffed. I made you fall in love with a fantasy. I made you betray me for something that never even existed. And now? Now, you have to live with it. Tears welled in her eyes, her hands trembling so badly she knocked over her wine glass, but she didn't even notice. No, she repeated, her voice breaking. This isn't real. Oh, but it is, I murmured, standing slowly, watching as she recoiled, as she shook her head, as she realized the full weight of her own destruction. I let you believe you were getting away with something. I let you feel the rush, the excitement, the danger. I let you dream about another man. And now? I smiled. Now, you don't even have him to run to. A sob tore from her lips, her hands covering her face, her body collapsing into herself as she broke, as she shattered, as she realized she had destroyed everything for nothing. And I stood there, satisfied, as I watched her drown in the consequences. Sophia didn't speak. She couldn't. She just sat there, staring at me like I was a stranger, like she didn't recognize the man in front of her, like she had never seen me before in her life. But I wasn't the stranger. He was. The man she thought she loved, the one she had risked everything for, the one she had whispered secrets to in the dead of night, the one she had planned to betray me for. He was never real. He was nothing but my words, my control, my manipulation wrapped in a fantasy she had willingly fallen into. And now, as the weight of it all crashed down on her, as she gasped for air like she was drowning in her own guilt, I just stood there, watching her break. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, desperate, frantic, as if she still believed, deep down, that she could somehow fix this. That if she just found one last message, one last sign that he was real, everything would make sense again. But there was nothing. Just an empty inbox, a blank screen, a reminder that she had fallen in love with a ghost. I watched as her breath hitched, as her fingers hovered over the keyboard like she was about to type something, then stopped, because what was left to say? Who was left to say it to? She let the phone slip from her hands, her shoulders shaking, a choked sob escaping before she could stop it. Why? She whispered, her voice so small, so pathetic. Why would you do this to me? I leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, tilting my head slightly as I studied her. Why? I repeated, letting the words settle, letting the silence stretch, letting her feel the full weight of what she had just asked me. You really don't know? She shook her head, blinking rapidly, her whole body trembling. Michael, I. Say it. I cut her off, my voice low, even. Say what you did. She inhaled sharply, pressing her fingers to her lips, shaking her head, but she knew she couldn't avoid it. She knew she had no way out of this. She swallowed hard, forcing the words out like they physically hurt her. I was talking to someone else. I scoffed, shaking my head. Talking? Is that what you call it? Tears welled in her eyes, her breathing uneven. Her hands clenched so tightly into fists her knuckles went white. It wasn't real. I let out a sharp laugh, dark and amused, watching as she flinched. And yet, you were ready to throw our entire marriage away for it. I pushed off the counter, stepping closer, lowering my voice. Tell me something, Sophia. When you were lying next to me, sneaking messages in the middle of the night, when you were whispering things to him you never said to me, when you were making plans, telling yourself you deserved more, did it feel real then? She opened her mouth, then shut it, her throat working as she tried to form words, but she had nothing, because she knew the truth. She had been ready to betray me. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head, running a hand through my hair like this was exhausting, like I was the one who had been wronged, like I was the one who was trying to make sense of it all. You made it so easy, I murmured, my voice almost disappointed. I didn't even have to push you. You wanted it. You chased it. You fell for it without a second thought. I laughed again, cold and sharp. And now? Now you don't even have him to run to. A sob tore from her lips, raw and broken, her hands covering her face like she could somehow hide from the truth. But she couldn't. She had nothing left to hold on to. Not him. Not me. The best part? She knew it. She lifted her head slowly, her eyes glassy, lips trembling. Michael, she whispered, voice barely audible. Please. Please? Please what? Please forgive her? Please pretend this never happened? Please be the husband she had taken for granted while she lived in her fantasy? Please make it go away? I smiled. Cold, cruel, unforgiving. No. And I walked away. I left her sitting there, shaking, breaking, drowning in the silence I had created, in the emptiness she had willingly walked into. She didn't call after me, didn't chase me, didn't try to explain herself, because what was left to explain? What could she possibly say to fix this? Nothing. She had destroyed herself. I heard her sob the moment I stepped into the hallway, a sound so raw, so broken, that for a second, just one, I almost felt something for her. Almost. But then I remembered the way she had smiled at her phone when she thought I wasn't watching, the way she had whispered his name at night, the way she had risked everything for a man who was never even real. And just like that, whatever feeling had started to creep in was gone. I had one. She didn't sleep that night. Neither did I. She stayed curled up on the couch, unmoving, phone clutched in her hands even though there was nothing left to check. I knew she wanted to talk, wanted to beg, but she didn't know how, didn't know what to say, and I wasn't going to make it easy for her. I wanted her to sit in this, to feel it, to realize, with every hour that passed, just how deeply she had destroyed everything. By morning, she looked hollow. Her eyes were swollen, her skin pale, her hands shaking as she set down her untouched coffee. She didn't even look at me when she finally whispered, "Are you leaving me?" I should have. I should have packed my bags, walked out the door, left her to rot in the mess she had made. But something inside me told me that wasn't enough. Not yet. She had spent weeks, months, pulling away, convincing herself that she wanted something more, something better. She had spent so much time living in a fantasy that reality no longer made sense to her. She had been ready to leave me for nothing. I wanted to make sure she felt what that really meant. I set my mug down carefully, leaning back in my chair, watching as she barely met my eyes. "Do you want me to leave?" Her breath hitched, her fingers curling into her sleeves, her jaw tightening like she was forcing herself not to cry. No. I tilted my head, studying her, enjoying the way she squirmed under my silence, under the weight of a decision that wasn't even hers to make. Why not? She swallowed hard, her lips parting, but no words came out. I let the silence stretch, let her hear her own hesitation, Let her feel the consequences of her own actions pressing down on her like a weight she couldn't escape. "Because I love you," she finally whispered. Her voice so quiet, so desperate, that for a second, just one, I almost laughed. I smiled instead. Cold. Empty. "Do you?" Her entire body tensed, her face twisting in something close to pain, her nails digging into her palms. "Michael." "No." I cut her off smoothly, standing up slowly, watching as her eyes followed my movements like she was afraid of what I was going to do next. "You don't get to say my name like that. Like I'm still yours. Like I ever was." I stepped closer, lowering my voice, making sure she felt every word I said. "You didn't love me when you were sneaking around at night. You didn't love me when you were planning a future with another man. You didn't love me when you gave away pieces of yourself that were supposed to be mine." She flinched. Good. Tears spilled down her cheeks, her breath coming faster, her body trembling like she was barely holding herself together. But you know what the worst part is?" I continued, cutting her off again, my voice steady, calm, almost cruel in its control. "You didn't even cheat with a real person. You threw away our marriage for nothing." She gasped like I had hit her, like the reality of that hadn't truly sunk in until this moment, like she was just now understanding how deep my revenge had gone. I leaned in closer, my lips barely an inch from hers, close enough that she could feel my breath, that she could feel the warmth of what she had lost, the thing she had destroyed without even realizing it. "And now?" I whispered, my voice soft, almost gentle. "Now, I get to decide if I want to stay." Her lips trembled, her entire body frozen, waiting, hoping, praying for an answer that wouldn't come. Because I wasn't going to give her one. Not yet. I let the silence linger, let her feel the weight of uncertainty, the fear of knowing that she had no control anymore, that I was the only one who could choose how this ended. Then I stepped back, grabbed my keys, and walked to the door. "Michael," she choked out, pushing to her feet, almost stumbling in her rush to follow me. "Please." I turned, watching as she reached for me, as she begged without even realizing she was begging. And then, with a small, cruel smile, I said the one thing that would destroy her completely. "I'll let you know." And I walked out. I left her standing in the doorway, watching me walk away, her body tense, her breath uneven, her hands clenched so tightly at her sides that I thought she might collapse under the weight of it all. But she didn't. She just stood there, waiting, hoping, praying that I would turn around, that I would come back, that I would give her something, anything, to hold on to. But I didn't. I let her drown in the silence, in the uncertainty, in the same kind of torment she had put me through when she had stared at her phone at night, waiting for messages from a man who never existed. She had no idea if I was gone forever. And that was the point. I didn't go far. I didn't need to. I sat in my car, hands gripping the wheel, watching the house, watching the light from the living room spill onto the front porch, watching her silhouette through the curtains as she paced, panicked, unraveled. I knew she was breaking. I knew she was questioning every decision she had ever made. I knew she was hating herself more than she ever thought possible. And I let her sit in that feeling for hours. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't give her the closure she had stolen from me. She had spent so long chasing a fantasy that she had lost sight of reality, and now, reality was all she had left. And she hated it. By midnight, I finally went back. Not because I forgave her. Not because I wanted to. But because I wanted to watch her beg. And she did. The moment I stepped through the door, she was in front of me, eyes red, hands shaking, voice trembling as she whispered, "Michael, please." I didn't say anything. I just stood there, staring at her, letting her feel the weight of what she had done, letting her see the coldness in my eyes, the emptiness in my face, the absolute loss of the man she once knew. She had killed him. She had replaced him with something else, something unrecognizable, something that no longer loved her. And she knew it. She swallowed hard, stepping closer, reaching for me like she still had the right to touch me. "I'll do anything," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Anything to fix this. Just tell me how." I tilted my head, watching her. "You want to fix this?" She nodded frantically, eyes desperate, pathetic. Yes, please. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable, just long enough for her breath to hitch, for her shoulders to shake. And then I smiled. Small, cruel, unforgiving. You can't. Her entire body collapsed. A choked sob escaped her lips, her knees buckling, her hands gripping my shirt like she thought she could hold me in place, like she thought if she just held on tight enough, she could stop me from slipping away. But she couldn't. She had already lost me. She had lost everything. I'm sorry, she sobbed, pressing her forehead against my chest, her body trembling against mine. I'm so sorry. I reached up, brushing my fingers through her hair, letting her think, for just a second, that I might still care. And then I pulled back, forcing her to look at me, forcing her to see what she had done. You're not sorry for what you did, I said, my voice low, sharp, cutting through her like a knife. You're sorry you got caught. She shook her head violently, her tears falling harder, her lips parting like she was about to plead again. But I didn't give her the chance. I grabbed her wrists, pried her fingers off of me, and stepped back, leaving her standing there, lost, ruined, completely shattered. And then I walked upstairs. I didn't leave her that night. I didn't pack my bags. I didn't storm out and slam the door. Because that would have been mercy. And she didn't deserve mercy. No, I stayed. I let her fall asleep crying, let her wake up in a panic, let her live in a house where the air was thick with the truth she could never escape. I let her try to fix things, try to talk to me, try to earn back something that was already gone. I watched as she did everything she could to make up for something that couldn't be erased. She cooked, she cleaned, she left notes, she begged. And every time she tried, I gave her the same answer. Silence. She would never know if I would stay or if I would leave. She would never know if I would wake up one day and decide I was done. She would never know if, at any moment, the life she was desperately clinging to would disappear. She had spent so long living in a fantasy, and now, she was trapped in a nightmare. One that I created. And that was the real revenge.